Welcome back to the channel. I hope you've enjoyed the other videos that I've been doing. Have had some good comments. Hope to keep getting people to respond to these videos and whatnot. Anyway, I wanted to talk today about Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I very much enjoyed this book. However, according to a couple places that I've looked, the book either has over 700 pages or over 8. So, quite a thick tome to get through. And there are parts of it that are slow, unfortunately. So anyway, let me back up a bit. This is a historical fiction. It's set in England in the 1800s. It starts out in York, in England, and there's a club, basically, of men who they call themselves the Learned Society of York Magicians. And they call themselves theoretical magicians. Magic was once part of England. It now no longer is. And so what they do is they attempt to study magical texts, not necessarily to bring back magic, but just to study it and keep it as part of their heritage. And they meet a man who calls himself Gilbert, or I shouldn't say calls himself, his name is Mr. Gilbert Norrell. And he calls himself, this is the part where he calls himself a practical magician. And of course they laugh, because they're like, there hasn't been a practical magician in England for ages. And he says, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'll make you a deal. I will prove that I'm a practical magician and not just a theoretical magician by making the statues in the York Cathedral speak. Excuse me. And if I do this, then that means that you guys have to disband. You can't be a group anymore. And so they show up at the cathedral. The statues speak, and they are forced to disband. Now, it wouldn't have gone any further than this, but Mr. Norrell has a servant. His name is John Childermass, and he convinces one of the former members of the Learned Society of York Magicians to write an article in a London newspaper, and it catches the attention of people in London, and Mr. Norrell then moves to London, where he can practice magic in the eye of the English public and garner more attention for his efforts. And this then sets off a series of events where he starts working for the government. At this point in time, there's a war between England and Napoleon. Possibly most of the world and Napoleon at this point in time. But they want to find out if they can use Mr. Norrell's magic to counter Napoleon's forces. Now, this is the first part of the novel where we meet Mr. Norrell. He comes to London and everything, and it kind of, I mean, it takes a long time for this to happen. There seems to be no rush, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, in telling this story. So it does tend to take its time. In this case, it allows for greater side plots and stories to be explored in the work, because we have a, a fairy that they just call the gentleman with the thistledown hair. He gets summoned by Mr. Norrell in an effort to restore one of the cabinet ministers. One of the cabinet minister's wives has died. Mr. Norrell summons this fairy to bring her back to life. And there's a bunch of backstory going on at this point. And it isn't until quite a ways into the book. I mean, the whole first volume of the novel is about Mr. Norrell and his exploits. It isn't until we get to the second part of the novel that we even run into Jonathan Strange. Now, Jonathan Strange, by contrast to Mr. Norrell is an older gentleman, and he has interest in magic and always has had interest in magic, and so he has been teaching himself for years and years and years. And it isn't until this second volume of the novel, like I said, that we run into Jonathan Strange, who is a much younger man, and he kind of ends up coming into magic because he can't think of anything else to do with his life. It's like he gets married, and he, as I recall, I could be getting this completely off, but as I recall, he it was like he was asked, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, I don't know, magician? Because that was kind of something that was cool now because of Mr. Norrell and all the stuff that he'd been doing. And so Jonathan Strange gets into magic, and he meets Mr. Norrell and becomes his apprentice. And they end up kind of clashing, having a falling out, getting back to, mending, becoming friends again. There's a lot of stuff that ends up going on in this narrative. We have to still deal with who this fairy is, this man with the thistledown hair, and what he's doing. Because at one point it is because of him that King George III, the famous monarch with the madness. It comes out that it was his fault that King George was mad. And so we have to deal with him. Napoleon is still rampaging across Europe, so they have to deal with him. In fact, Jonathan Strange ends up being at the Battle of Waterloo and helping on the English side. And all the while, there is this myth that's kind of woven through the narrative of a supernatural being called the Raven King. I say supernatural being. He was originally an English magician, and he is taken on mythic proportions in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And there's a lot that ends up hinging on this legend, and the narrative just works that in to the rest of the story, because it ends up being quite an important part there at the end. Now, like I said, this is a thick tome. When I looked up on Amazon, they had the paperback volume, and it said the paperback volume was over 800 pages. I don't own the paperback volume. I own the the hardcover, and according to another source, when I looked up the page count in the hardcover, it said that it was 700 plus pages in the hardcover. So, like I said, it's very weighty tome. It took me longer to get through it than usual. Not just because there were so many pages in the book, but because, like I said, there are several places in the story where the narrative slows down. And we have years, we cover years in the space of the novel. Like I said, this actually is set historically in the 1800s. It starts in 1806 and ends... Let's see, I'm looking it up. The last date I can find is in 1816. So the novel covers at least 10 years of information. I did in trying to review for this video. I did look up some more information on the book and found out that Susanna Clarke did intend to write, and still does, it sounds like, intend to write a sequel to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It ends it has a rather open ending, meaning that it definitely could have flowed quite easily into a sequel. There was quite a bit of story left to go based on what was left of the ending. And that being said, it sounds like she's had some health issues and stuff that have contributed to her not having written this sequel yet. But the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about was apparently, let's see, where was it? New Line Cinema in 2004 bought an option for a movie of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. There is a television series. It was a 7-part adaptation of the book by the BBC. I've only seen part of the television adaptation. I liked the book, but I don't know that I wanted to delve into it again. I still have it. I still plan to maybe read it again in the future. If I like a book, it goes on my bookshelf and it stays. If I don't like a book, I get rid of it. So this one I have kept because I like the writing, I like the characters. I just think that this could have benefited from a treatment like The Lord of the Rings got, where The Lord of the Rings is 6 volumes, but they've split it up into 3 different books. And from what I understand, Tolkien wanted to print The Lord of the Rings as 1 book, but his publisher convinced him that that was just too much. And so they then broke it up into 3 books. And I think that Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell could definitely have benefited from treatment of that nature, where we had maybe half of the book and it was a 2-part series, rather than the whole book being 700 plus pages and covering 10 years worth of events. So anyway, that being said, it was good. Maybe I will go delve into the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell miniseries. Who knows? But I think the book is definitely worth at least 1 read. It's got some fascinating characters. It's well developed. It takes its time, and that's part of the reason why it has so many pages, why it's such a large book. So if you've thought, maybe I don't want to get into it because it's a daunting read, you might like it. So you might want to give it a chance. That being said, as always, like and subscribe, comment down below, and enjoy yourselves until next time.